Welcome to My on Mondays, an explorative approach to the possessive my through narratives, art, and sound. Each Monday brings a new creation and unique perspective. My on Mondays is brought to you by Ming Studios, a contemporary art space and international artist residency program dedicated to the exhibition, experience, and exploration of arts and culture. Along with exhibiting artists from around the world, Ming also serves the community by hosting innovative programs including performances, workshops, screenings, readings, artist talks, and other cultural activities. For more information, or if you'd like to participate in My on Mondays, you can visit our website at mingstudios.org. Hello and welcome to My on Mondays. This week we bring you another episode by the three Angsty Poets, Tomas Baiza, Rebecca Evans, and Winn, who once again gathered, initially to chat about poetry, but as always, the conversation turned. They found themselves invigorated, inspired, but mostly miffed at the world, the gods, the past, the future. In episode 4, they discuss their angst on gatekeeping and publishing. Tomas Baiza is originally from San Jose, California, and now finds himself in Boise, Idaho. He's the author of the novel Delivery, A Pocho's Accidental Guide to College, Love, and Pizza Delivery, published by Running Wild Press in 2023, and the mixed genre collection A Purpose to Our Savagery from Rise Press. Delivery was selected as the 2024 Treasure Valley Reads featured novel, and Tomas's writing has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize, the Best of the Net, and Best American Short Stories anthologies. Tomas has fenced in Italy, been rescued by a helicopter from the Sierra Nevada, fended off wild dogs while hitchhiking in rural Morelos, Mexico, and once delivered a dozen pizzas to a Klingon-themed orgy at a sci-fi convention. While he's not writing, Tomas is running trails or obsessing over bonsai trees. Rebecca Evans writes the difficult, the heartful, the guidebooks for survivors. Her work has appeared in Narratively, The Rumpus, Brevity, and more. She's earned 2 MFAs, one in creative nonfiction, the other in poetry from the University of Nevada, Reno at Lake Tahoe. She's authored a full-length poetry collection, Tangled by Blood, published by Moontide Press in 2023, and her second book, Safe Handling, came out in 2024. She shares space in a tiny Idaho town with her sons and 4 Newfoundlands. Winn is a fiction writer, poet, nonfiction writer, teacher of creative writing, and producer of literary and storytelling events based in Boise, Idaho. He's the author of 2 story collections, Naked Me and What's Wrong with You is What's Wrong with Me, and the forthcoming novels Crocodile and My History with Careless People and Other Stories. His work has appeared in McSweeney's, Plowshares, the Chicago Tribune's Printer Row Journal, Glimmer Train, Joyland, Expat Press, Tri-Quarterly, Gulf Coast, and many other fine magazines and journals. And from 2016 to 2019, he was the Idaho Writer-in-Residence, the state's highest literary honor.
Welcome to our 4th episode of 3 Angsty Poets, which includes myself, Rebecca Evans, with Tomas Baiza and Winn. And today we are talking about our angst with gatekeeping. Dun, dun, dun.
So I think I'm supposed to start.
I think so. Yeah.
I don't know that it's ever
You're
a good
the
idea to
gatekeeper
start
of the
with me,
gatekeeper,
right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna. This is not a hot take, and I'm going to answer the question I think as annoyingly broadly as possible. To me, a gatekeeper in writing, for better or for worse, is anybody who stands between you and your goal as a writer.
Okay, that's solid.
A great definition. You should be on Webster's board.
Yeah, that's a good place to start for sure, because it is like your goal as a writer. It's going to be different, obviously. I mean, I think it may be essentially for nearly every writer, it's kind of the baseline same. You want your voice to be heard, at least to yourself. You want to understand the world better. You want to, tell some stories or write some beautiful poems or write your screenplay or whatever. But yeah, on the backside, the take for me is like, yeah, like what your goals would be, but also sort of who's stopping you from, if you want to make a lot of money with your writing, or you want to be successful, have a broad reach, there's going to be a different type of gatekeeper than there is for like a zine publisher or an indie publisher or, a vanity press, quote unquote. We'll get into some of that. But I mean, there's just different levels. And a gatekeeper is, I think that's the people sort of who are between you, whether that's nobody, maybe there's no gatekeeper, there's just a gate that you open yourself, or what you want your work to be. So it's like, I think the gatekeeper is malleable, I guess, based upon your goals, but also it can be frustrating. We'll get into our angst on this, because I think that there are some needless, weird steps that the gatekeepers put in our way to get the work out there, but also there's some necessary steps, and then it gets complicated, and they want to make their money. Maybe you want to make your money. I feel like their money's kind of maybe they're not always writers, these gatekeepers too. That's what gets angsty for me. So I don't know. What do you think, Rebecca?
Yeah, this is definitely an angsty topic, and we can talk about this probably for more than one episode. Mm-hmm. Initially, when I think of gatekeeper, the first thing I thought of was Monty Python and the Holy Grail and the Keeper of the Bridge of Death, right? And that's how I look at the publishing gatekeepers. Because historically, like, where did this even come from, right? When we first started with publications, the kings, the queens, the lit critics, the professors, universities, like they, basically curated and decided who could be published and heard, who could read, who could have access to what was being published, right? How it would be said and stated. And so you look at archives of literature, who wasn't allowed through that we didn't have access to, don't have access to today. And Aristotle was the first really original gatekeeper. Like, he developed all these categories of literary art, literature, and this is who could belong here and who could belong there. And so these categories and these levels of like who's allowed came from, higher ups, suppressing those who were poorer and those who didn't have access to education and all those other things that are problems still today, right? And so, like, when I think of gatekeepers, it's like, who's holding me back? And yeah, a lot of times it's me, and it's not about the bottom line. It's about who's holding me back from achieving anything that I want to do with any form of my art, and why. What is the point of them gatekeeping? And there can be some good points, like it needs to be revised and edited, it's not streamlined enough, whatever. But there's also a lot of angsty areas for me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of the deep history of it, for sure. And it still is basically in place from the way it was set up, centuries ago, millennia ago. But I do think it's far more complicated now too, because there are different ways to kind of eschew or kind of get around, a gatekeeper at all these days. You publish zines, you publish your own stuff that way, or, you go through a poetry publisher, and there are several levels to have gotten there in the first place. But, I mean, there's just, it's a broad topic for sure. But, personally, I just feel like it gets very frustrating, or just sort of, it's a hard puzzle to kind of solve, or kind of, sort of, whatever it is, an egg to crack or something. But it's like you start with like the work itself, yourself. It's like you make you're kind of your own gatekeeper. If you're writing in your journal, you're writing some poems, and you're like, okay. Then you're going back in, you're editing them, and then you're like, all right, now I have to put this on a piece of paper or in a file, and I have to send it to literary magazines or poetry press, and they are gatekeeping me. It's outside of my purview now. And then from there, sort of, if that public poem gets rejected, you go back, you work on it again, you show it to some friends. You two might be my gatekeepers on another level, and then I edit it, then it does get published, and then I have to find, a place for it in my book. And so anyway, it goes all the way up, and then then there's the agent aspect too, that they become a gatekeeper, and then the larger presses become a gatekeeper. So there's just so many steps that can stand in the way of a writer.
But who gets the keys?
They all have their own keys.
The backstage pass to, like,
I know.
I mean, we could start with the literary journals, but because that's the first step for like many writers, right? Is like starting in the lit journals. But that's my question, like for you, Christian, in publishing, the gatekeepers, yes, you have the editors, agents. You have, once an agent puts books out for, on sub, then you have, are they going to acquire it? So there's the acquiring editors, do they even think it's marketable? So then it is about a bottom line, right? The gatekeepers now become about bottom line instead of like, is this beautiful, necessary art that should be in the world? So what's your take? Like who are those gatekeepers in publishing, and how, is there a secret handshake,
Well, I do think, all this take it from the point of view, because there's so many different levels of publishing and kind of and genres of publishing. I'm just going to say, okay, I'm a literary fiction writer, a writer of novels and short stories, and I'm publishing my work here and there, and I crack into the first gatekeeper and I get an agent, let's say. Well, that's already a huge step, so she or he has a key. They have a key, first of all. But then from there, and I've had personal experience with this, having a lot of success with a manuscript that had come very close. But then like my level of gatekeeper, just a personal experience, was that it was like, the next level was like, let's say HarperCollins, who had the manuscript. Some people there liked the manuscript. Some people were like, And then ultimately it came down to sort of I don't know who it was, the people in the meeting on the call, we're like, well, we really like this book a lot. We really think it'd be great. And some people said and probably were grumbling about it, whatever. But then the emails I got back were that they had published a couple of titles over the last couple of years that were maybe they thought they were too similar.
Yeah.
And they were like, we're just going to ultimately have to pass. Or this happened again in a similar way with a different manuscript. But, that one's still, they both have legs still for me personally. But it was like they were gatekeepers at that level. So basically they shut the gate on me in that instance at the end because they felt like it was a sales thing. I feel like, or it wasn't going to fit their catalog. So I'll leave it at that. We can go to Tomas.
Yeah, we'll go to Tomas. I just want to make a comment on that. But yet you have to have recent comps for your book, right? So if you don't have those comparables, but then if the comparables exist,
what do you mean by
comparables?
comparables?
Comparables, like who does this sit on the shelf next to? But if it's too close to something they've already done, then you get nixed for that. Like it's this game, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, Tomas, you talk
I know
for a
that
little
it
bit.
is such a real game, and it's like that's where it gets like you want to throw your hands up, and then like I'm just gonna. I don't know what you're going to do, but what are you going to do, Tomas?
What's the question? What's the prompt?
Well, the question was, as a writer, who has the keys in the publishing world? How does a writer get a backstage pass? How do you earn,
And I guess I didn't answer like how they got the keys.
That's
in the
okay,
first place.
Tomas.
We'll go back to that
we'll
in
come
a
back.
second.
Yeah, but Tomas, and how did they get those keys? Yeah. What are your thoughts?
At some point, the people who are the curators or the tastemakers have convinced others that they're able to judge other people's writings and determine what's good writing. And I don't know how they do that. I mean, how do you become an agent? You decide that you're going to read people's stuff and you can critique it and understand it well enough to decide whether it's worthy of being represented to a company. I know that they're out there. They've all rejected me. How the hell does one take that step and say, yes, I have what it takes to judge other people's art and determine whether it should see the light of day?
Right.
That's not me, I'll tell you that. But would I feel differently about agents if I had one in my corner saying, Tomas, I really love your writing. I'm going to represent you. I'm here for you. And I'm going to make sure that all of these publishers are at least getting eyes on your stuff. I might have a very different take on what it's like to be a gatekeeper because I've got one on my side.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where I want to bring up maybe the topic of conflicted ideas of gatekeeping. I said at the beginning, I think a gatekeeper is anybody who stands between a writer and their goals. That inherently, I think, rubs up against our very egalitarian idea that everyone should have access to publications. Is that true? Don't. Let's face it. Don't we feel much more proud about a publication when we know that place is really selective? And wouldn't we feel somewhat less proud if we got published by a place that we knew accepted everything that got submitted? So I think we have to admit that, like it or not, we kind of rely on gatekeepers to check us, or as long as it doesn't turn internally toxic, to give us an indication as to whether what we're doing is worth it. And I hate those words coming out of my mouth, but I have to admit it.
But I think you're seeing if you measure up in the literary world. I definitely agree with that. Like, is my art measuring up by critic literary standards, right? And I think that's an important aspect, but it is so subjective. I'm going to answer the question too, because I think you ask a really powerful aspect of it, and then we'll go back to you to re-answer the real question, Christian. But I think, like, in my mind, like, some of the gatekeepers start, in the traditional MFA programs. They're the first readers of slush piles. And I really, would advise anybody out there, become a reader. Get
for
that
journal,
internship for a journal. Become a reader for a journal. And go through the slush piles, because when you start doing that, you understand a little bit about gatekeeping and how quickly you can decide. I mean, really, after you do that for a year, you're one paragraph in and you're compelling nope on. And,
right, and a slush pile is just an unsolicited submission.
Right.
Basically.
Right.
To, we were sending it in either by snail mail back in the day, or mostly, of course, by, sort of online submission process.
But I think the challenge can be in the hierarchy of lit journals or other areas. Agents also have screeners, right?
For sure.
They have interns that read through their slush piles, right? So, where those interns come in, through different channels, the challenge for me right now is if you are selectively hiring only in certain demographics and your bio's on there and they're like, well, she's over 60, and I just don't think she can write anything hip. There's some prejudgment happening that's subjective that's getting turned away by someone who's not experienced. And so I think those are who are getting trained and pushed in, and then they're also certain demographics are being hired, so other demographics are being left out, or certain demographics are being interned. So you have all of that swirling around subjective opinion, right? It still comes back to subjective opinion. But I will say, reading through, I did that for about 2 years, and it was very, very helpful in helping me understand the submission process, making my submission stronger, but also being hey, thanks for, if I got any feedback on a rejection, I felt like this needed to be expanded, on the second page. I'm like, wow, that was really generous of them. Right.
Yeah, and behind the scenes there, it can be a little bit ugly at times. I know that as far as just who's reading or how much time they're putting into your work, it's often very, you kind of feel like they probably spent some time really digging into it. But that turns out not to necessarily be true on a college campus, especially. I feel like I have some horror stories from friends. I had a good experience with the Idaho Review at Boise State, which is we had just one, I think at that time still it was just once a year. So we had more time. Well, it was published once a year, like it still is now. But we had more time to kind of sit with these submissions because it was only once a year. If you're turning over a lot, I don't know. And yeah, who, like you were saying, Tomas, who are these people and why did they how do they become agents? And that becomes, I think it's kind of like finding, if you have some success, I think that's kind of seems to be the way it works. And I'm just totally mostly talking out of school here, but it's you're the agent, Tomas, who's broke a certain book by a certain author and they did great. It's you found it. You're I found this gem, this new voice. And then you get a bunch of praise for this. You get promoted, you're doing well. Now you're the new tastemaker a little bit. And then you get people like me coming along to be I'd love to work for you. Wow, it'd be awesome. So then you're a baby agent. And then they kind of try to make their they're trying to make their name and
therein lies the birth of the agency.
Yes, yeah. And the agency, and there's larger ones. There's individuals who are just agents, and they have baby agents around them, or maybe they're just by themselves. Some of them but it is a really random thing in a lot of ways, and it's what sometimes we don't really know what sometimes makes a great successful new gem of a voice out there in the world? What hits the zeitgeist when? And so it's like kind of a little bit of like, it's like finding like the Tiny Desk concert for voice or for NPR. They'd have like open submissions to musicians and artists in the musical realm, and then whoever wins that, because they chose it, becomes they're going to get a whatever you get these days, a record deal, so to speak, and like boom, there you go, you've made it.
So going off script here, I have to insert some of my angst here.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to be quiet. Yeah.
The whole idea of gatekeeping, I think, can be problematic, but I accept that it exists, and I'll accept that there are times that I was glad that I made the cut, and other times I was pissed off that I made the cut, and other times I totally understood it. You have to make the cut because there are tastemakers and gatekeepers. I get that. My hugest issue with gatekeeping is how selectively the filter is applied depending on who the author is. Mm-hmm. If a gatekeeper holds the same standards for every single submission that they receive, then I'm not going to fault them for being a gatekeeper. They have standards, they stick to them, and they apply them evenly to all of the authors. I have seen that not happen. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It bugs the living shit out of me when I have watched firsthand a name brand author submit something that's not even so-so. It's not done. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But there is a decision made that this piece is going to get published because author is named at insert name here.
Right.
And that journal bends over backwards to fix that author's work and publish it. Whereas other pieces that are submitted in the same period are done. For better and for worse, they're complete. They're the best thing. You can tell they're the best thing that author can put out at that time. And some of them are pretty good, but they don't get the same sunlight that this other author's work did.
And the editorial tutorship to make it better, right? So not only, the time and money that they're spending on the author to schmooze them is, I've seen that too.
Absolutely.
And I think one way around that, this is my opinion, but a way to fix my angst is it's all blind submissions. I don't think you should be sending in your photo. I am totally against that. Why does that matter? It should all be about the art, the writing, the voice, like what is happening here? Why do you need my bio? Why does it matter if I have anything else published ever?
Right.
It should be all about the art. And they're looking at it again like bottom line. If this writer has some books out, maybe she'll get more readership, right? We'll sell more journals, right? So it becomes a business exchange versus an art
right.
opportunity.
But you do have to think that, what they want on the backside, what we want as artists is not exactly what they want as publishers and different levels, so they want, that new, Joyce Carol Oates story in the her 400th story that has been put out in the last 10 years. That's a little bit much, Joyce. I'm sorry, but but she does have a lot of work out there. And that's maybe not the best example. But they want a name from whatever genre magazine they're putting out, or if they're a publisher, like the new so and so coming out is like going to make them more money, more eyes on it, more. Just book sales. And so they want that. And that becomes the hard part. And even if you're a zine or let's say an indie publisher, you want maybe someone who's going to take some new work from somebody who's doing something experimental, who's already published some big stuff before. So you're like, oh, it's that new person, that person's new work. But anyway,
I also suspect that as publishers want to spend less and less on marketing, they're placing a premium on previously published authors because they're assuming / hoping that those authors have followings and can market themselves more easily. And so they won't have to do all the work of marketing these authors because they already have followings. They already know how to get their names out there. So they're hoping that those authors will do much of the work for them.
It does make a difference for sure on social media followers. I know what
they ask you sometimes, how many social media followers do you have?
What's your handle?
I hate that question because I know exactly why they're asking it.
Well, and if you write anything in the world of nonfiction, of creative nonfiction, longer form, you have to do, you have to submit a proposal, and in that proposal includes your social media, how many followers, who is your target market, what are your comparables, all of that stuff, right? It's a 40-page document. You don't have to do that in fiction or YA or any place else, but in CNF, like that is a requirement, and it is a boatload of research, and it is highly, highly competitive, but all it is about the numbers, right? It's like, can we move this book? And I get it, like they need to be able to move the book. And on the flip side, the frustrated, angsty writers are self-publishing. And I wanted our conversation too, like what about the influence of the self-publishers now, the impact on the gatekeepers or the standards in the industry? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it is a little bit, it's always been a bit of a stigma for me personally, just growing up with like, being around for a few years now doing this is like, I don't know that I want to go to the self-pub. I mean, I've, created my own small like zines and things like that for, sort of, and work with, very localized publications, especially several years ago. But anyway, I haven't gone there myself to like put my own work, but I've considered starting a press more recently in the last few years, and been like, I should just, I feel like I can do this better than they're doing it, let's say, at least for an indie publisher. But I think it's taken I don't know. I mean, it's you can do so much now with like print on demand, with just, sort of creating your own little, world of, I think for sure, maybe it's more applicable to genre writers, and you guys can answer this, but I know I had a student who was like, she's writing cozy romances, and as opposed to this and that, she's a lawyer, now she's doing this book stuff for full time, and she would like basically create in a self-published sort of way this kind of market for, she was on Instagram, she was on Twitter, she was on this, and she had all these people who were following her work. And it was all created it was her own brand, her own stuff, her own press she created. And I think that's great. I mean, you're getting the work out. You're going to call it Big Winn Press.
Yeah, that's your publishing house.
BWP. Okay. Big Winn Press. All right. We'll go with that. All right. You want to be on Big Winn Press?
Sure, I'll be your first author.
All right, there we go.
You heard it here, folks.
Right.
It started here.
Okay.
What about you, Tomas? Like, what's your feeling as far as like the influence, the impact of self-publishing, vanity publishing?
I don't know that I can speak knowledgeably about the impact on the industry. All I can talk about is how I feel about self-publishing. I admire the hell out of anyone who does it. I also know that I never wanted to do it. When I was initially looking for agents and realized that I think that that's just not going to work out, I did look into self-publishing, mostly out of desperation. I just had this thing that I needed to get out into the world, and so I was starting to see that the agent thing wasn't going to work out. And this is before I understood that you could submit directly to certain presses, particularly independent presses. Mm-hmm. So I looked into self-publishing. And I went down a really deep rabbit hole on how to do it, and saw that some people were super successful and a vast majority were not. But hey, get in line. Some writers are super successful and a vast majority are not. Mm-hmm. And so that wasn't a huge shock. But something hit me. I was reading someone's blog. I don't remember her name. She was a great writer, and I really appreciated the things that she said about her own experience self-publishing. But she said something that just never left me. She said, if you self-publish, you need to be prepared to be a douchebag 100% of the time. Every single email, every single social media post, every single conversation, every single phone call is going to be about you and your goddamn book. Uh-huh. And that really, and I don't know if that's necessarily true, but that was definitely her experience. And I thought, I don't want that to be me. I think I would even be okay with my book never getting out into the world, because I don't want that to become my life. And it kind of halfway has already.
Right.
But at least I can say I didn't self-publish. And the only way that people find out about it is through me and through me alone. And so I that veered me away from self-publishing. And so I kind of went back to the grindstone and started trying to figure out how to get the book out in other ways.
Yeah, that's kind of the state of the world right now, with like the publishing world, at least, because you can do anything, by yourself pretty much. I mean, with just a little bit of money, or almost no money at all, you can start a press if you want.
I will say this: if you self-publish, or the people that I know who have self-published, whose works have been really good, they did not benefit from a publisher's editor being assigned to you and putting you through your paces to make sure that piece is as good as can be. And so if you're going to self-publish, make damn sure you have found a very talented and brutally honest, objective editor who's going to put you through the ringer before you self-publish. Because I've seen a lot of self-published pieces that frankly just did not get edited.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree with that. I think if you want to self-publish, it's like people who want to have plastic surgery. Like, if that's for you, like, go do that. You know what I mean? Like, it's your journey, man, and I support that.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't have a challenge with that, but I do think, like, industry standards, like, take some pride, take some time, have, some early readers, have, if you're in the developmental stage, have a developmental editor, a copy editor, a true hard editor that's going to, like, help you shape that into the most beautiful thing, because it's going to be out in the world and represent you. And I think, to me, there's an area in the self-publishing, vanity publishing, where there's not enough time or pride put into the work. It's like quickly just turned around and put out there. And I'm not saying I quickly turn around work, so I'm not saying it can't be done where you quickly turn around, finished and polished pieces. But I think in that realm, that falls off the table a little bit, having those standards falls off the table for some.
Yeah, I mean, I think the people they do get very excited. I mean, I think, well,
they get
they get excited to have their own work out, and they want to have their voices heard. They want to have their stories told. They think, everybody thinks they have that, or not shouldn't everybody, but many people who do take the time to put, pen to paper, so to speak, do think that their work, is worthy of something, of an audience. And some people don't have, like, maybe a good enough gatekeeper within them, instead of to be like, oh, we've all read stuff that's like, oh, that probably wasn't ready to go out into the world yet. So having a good editor, but and people do, like, the vanity press is kind of a weird term. It's because people I know, who they just want their work, they're like, or even that they just want, they're a, sort of a physical therapist, and they have all this really great experience. They want their story told, and they have this really cool backstory. And so maybe they'll bring somebody on to help them write that book and then get their book out in the world and publish it themselves. But then again, there's others who are doing it more. They want to make a career out of it as, maybe a cozy romance writer who has their own pocket of, like, fans. And then there's others, like, maybe if I was going to start one, I'd probably start a press and be the gatekeeper for other people, but also maybe, quite honestly, probably would put my own work in that mix with other people like yourselves, maybe looking at it. So there's people who have maybe a little bit more interest in publishing not only their own work and having their own name out there, but also sort of like I have a little interest in being a gatekeeper myself, because I think, like I said, I can do this better than you guys a lot of times.
Well, yeah,
I feel
and
like,
let's be nice to some gatekeepers, right? I think a lot of them get into it because they truly do love literature or creative
and
writing.
the writers, and I know a lot of agents and almost all editors that I know are writers, are critical, damn good writers. I want to say, like, Vanity Press, in my understanding, is a press you pay to get published.
Okay,
right?
That's true. There's that whole thing.
Yeah, so there's that whole industry, where it's like, okay, you pay me $10,000 and we'll publish your book and we'll do all the marketing and da-da-da. They don't care what they publish. It doesn't even matter, right? Mm-hmm. All they're doing is getting your money and turning it around. And ghostwriting is a whole different thing we could talk about in an angsty way. And an interesting way too, right? What is that whole
that pays
whole
good money
thing?
too? That's the thing. We could do that. Yeah,
we could do ghostwriting. I don't think I could do I don't think I could.
I've never done it like in
For real? I don't know. I think you're already doing it as a fiction writer.
Oh, that's the thing. I'm always ghostwriting. But yes.
So I want to throw something else out that I don't know that we had prepared for, and I don't know that it should take up a lot of time, but we're talking about gatekeepers in the industry, and that's fine. What about gatekeepers in other forms? I have found in my own writing experience in life that gatekeepers, that pen is deliberately difficult to use because
Rebecca's trying to figure out
there we go.
Tomas's pen.
I have found that the people in my personal life can be just as powerful gatekeepers as anybody in the industry.
How do you mean?
There are people.
In your writing?
There are people in our lives, friends, acquaintances, employers. Maybe I'm making that one up. Maybe, but people who are, for whatever reason, positive or negative, invested in your writing, who I think sometimes knowingly or unknowingly try to exert an influence on it. How many times have people been told, nah, you shouldn't write about that? Or, ooh, really? That topic? Seriously? That's gatekeeping. That's somebody who's getting in between you and your goals.
Yeah, I know. I think and it's hard to kind of put those voices, to put them aside.
Yeah.
I just recently had a friend / fellow writer, it's like, well, you gotta stop writing about these young people. You're getting up there in your 50s now, so you gotta maybe why don't you write us more mature characters, quote unquote. And I'm like,
why don't you shut up and write your own stuff? Yeah,
exactly. I'm gonna write about whoever I want to write about, as long as I do it well. That's all I really care about. But I mean, it's made me think, like, maybe it's kind of weird.
I had somebody the other day look at me and say, and for no great reason other than I think that somehow this served them personally, and the talk was generally speaking about art and writing and representation and all that. And I had somebody just look at me and go, dude, you're not Chicano. And I was like,
oh.
What?
And I had to remember who I was, where I was, what I stand to lose by acting like my 20-year-old self in response to something like that. And I was like, wow, I really need to think about that shit, because if I let it get deep into my head, that could affect what I want to write about, what I feel like I have the right to write about and the experience to write about. It comes back to if you're an author of insert any identity here that can enhance your writing in some way through experience and power of voice, someone's going to question you on it, because if you're from a minority or vulnerable community, we're really tough on one another when it comes to somebody who stands up and tries to represent. Even if your goal isn't to represent, even if it's to represent yourself, there's still this crab pot idea, like, oh, I got to pull them back down. I got to knock them down. They're not black enough. They're not Jewish enough. They're not female enough. They're not feminist enough. They're not queer enough.
Small enough, old enough, big enough, tall enough, young enough. Like, you're never enough. And you know what? I got asked almost the opposite thing. Like, are you trying to represent too many things? And I almost sent them our pigeonholing, thing, because I'm like, but I am all of these things. Right. I cannot stop being a military veteran or a mother to a disabled son, or myself with all my own challenges. And
but
these
you're
are
just
my
too complicated,
experiences.
Rebecca.
Yeah,
come on,
so
simple it down.
do you have to write about why? If you focused on one thing, or one form, and I'm like, but I'm not just a poet. I'm also an essayist. I'm also, like, whatever way story comes out of me. If it's a visual art, then that's great. If it's a zine, great. That's how I was able to access that story.
Right.
And who are you to tell me I shouldn't do it that way, right? But I don't know if it's people checking you in a way that is helpful, right? And because I have to stop and ask, like, what is the intention behind that question? Is it helpful? Do they see that I'm burning myself out? Do they see that I'm not successful some way? Why? What is their intention behind it? Or is their intention like, I just seem to be tuning too much and they're not keeping up? Like, I don't know what I'm not in their head and their heart. But I find, like, if you go to the intention, like someone who asks you, or, you're not Chicano enough, or are you like, why are you asking that question?
It wasn't. If it were a question, I'd have had some answers. It was an accusation.
That's even better.
Like, in real life, you're not Chicano enough, is what they thought.
Yeah, well, and I'm not trying to turn this into a discussion all about that.
You mean you don't eat salsa and chips every morning for breakfast?
The point of that is
wow.
There are people, we judge one another on the things that we think other people should be about. And I think I try to do that as little as possible, knowing that I do it as a human being.
Right.
And when other people do that just with impunity because they have strong opinions or they care for you or they really don't, it can affect your art. I try to check myself when I'm looking at my daughter's visual art, and I might have an opinion about how she did a tree like the other night, and I'm kicking myself for complaining that tree looks a little bit too much like the next tree, because I'm like, who am I to do that? I can't paint a tree.
Right.
So
but I mean, that's a good question, or good kind of comment to our larger questions too, like, because you made the comment, let's say you're the gatekeeper of sorts, but you're also like the curator a little bit, which is important, an important role, not necessarily just with your daughter, but I mean, in the larger world, I mean, the curators are important.
Right.
And so that's one of the hard things too. I mean, because I think that on the other side, you know, the ideal gatekeepers are going to be the people, and they've been bending over all. I mean, I shouldn't say that's not a good way to put it, but just like trying to be as inclusive as they possibly can. I think over the last many years, several years, I should say now more than ever, which is great. But and figuring out there's always going to be mistakes and trouble in that job as a gatekeeper. You know, I feel like people who are on like awards, you know, sort of committees, you know, picking out, you know, the Pulitzer Prize winner or the, you know, sort of the, you know, sort of the Booker Prize winner or whatever in fiction. And then, you know, there's always going to be complaints, and they know that. But I mean, and also if you're just an editor for like a press, if I open my own, I mean, it's a lot of responsibility. Like you hold somebody's art and you're doing a lot, you know, so if you are a gatekeeper, if you're thinking about becoming a gatekeeper, talk to us gatekeepers first, and you can figure out how to do it better. But it is like something that you've got to figure. These people, the agents, they care about this stuff. I mean, they want a career, but I mean, the ones that I've dealt with have been like, they want to be an advocate for somebody. They want to be somebody that, you know, who they can publish that next great book. If your book is the next great book, they love it. They don't necessarily just do it selfishly, but I'm sure there are some that do it.
And I would say like another way in, if we think about it, like as artists, like what could we do to help shift a little bit? I do think like blind submissions is a very good idea, in my opinion. I also think more artists being seriously involved in anthologies, because if you are part of an anthology, if you help edit an anthology, you become a gatekeeper, and you are curating a piece of art, of other people's work. I mean, when I co-edited the RBG book, I took it so seriously and took so much time. This was a tribute to RBG, and I took it really seriously. And the artists who like offered up their poetry, you know, to be part of this book, like I wanted it to be perfect on the page. And, you know, we went through 7 galleys, I think, you know, to make sure everything was like just perfect. So I think when you try to be part of that process, we become part of the answer, right? Opening your own press, part of the answer, part of the solution. And I think that's important too. Like we can angst all day, but I do think in our angst, the three of us are also trying to find ways to be part of the solution. We're having this conversation, and it's so important, like this is talked about. And I do think like there's ways in, like what could we do, you know, to help shift a little bit. I do think it's better than what it was, but I still think there's a lot of problems with it. I see a lot of good writers get completely discouraged, and I think their voices get lost in the shuffle, and it makes me really sad. Like I see on that end, it's just sad for the industry.
But it is possible to be a gatekeeper and still be very humane.
Yes.
I've received some extremely gracious rejections, and they weren't. Some of them involved praise, but not all of them did. But you could tell that that message was for you. It wasn't just a form message and submittable or an email. So it is possible to do what you feel like you need to do for your publication, and weed out things that you don't think will cut it or don't quite fit what you're going for, but treat people well. And I think that for me makes it easier to work with gatekeepers and accept decisions if they don't go my way, because I know that they gave a crap.
Can I just say this little angsty thing, which might be a different whole episode? Like, we are the only industry in the world of art where we pay to submit our work.
Well,
like what? Like seriously, no, artists don't do this. Musicians do not pay. They do a demo, they send it, people listen, it gets picked up, it doesn't. They are not in this.
It's a lot harder to read a book than it is listen to 3-minute songs.
I know.
I don't know if that's,
but we are the only industry, like we pay, and then, you know, and maybe we get paid, but a lot of times we don't get paid if our work gets published.
No.
Like
even if you're
right?
publishing a book, you don't really get paid much at all.
Right.
You know, that's another subject too.
Yeah,
the gatekeepers need to pay some money sometimes. But but there are, pay to play places for music. But I think for artists getting into gallery, visual artists getting into galleries, it's kind of a little bit of the same. Maybe not. I mean, we're paying a small, like let's say $5 to submit a piece to a magazine generally, or a contest maybe $25. So it's not like they're really breaking us too much, but it is kind of effed up, for sure, to have to like outlay $50 to send in 10 stories, and you're like, or 10
10
versions
stories
of,
and they can publish all of them and you don't get paid anything. So you paid them to like publish your work or even read it, right? So it's like, I mean, I can go on about that, and I know writers now that are like, forget, I'm not doing that anymore. Like they can ask me.
I do too. Yeah, exactly. I think that I know several artists, and you have to do it for your own reasons. I mean, if you want just your work to be out in the world, you can do it in many ways. But also, if you want to, you believe in it, in the process of it. You want to feel like you said, Tomas, like they do give a crap, and you said this too. But I mean, like that's the thing. Sometimes you feel that's maybe the angstiest thing when you're like, these motherfuckers didn't even read. They didn't even put the time in. Yeah, I know that. Then you hear stories on the back end of a friend who nightmare stories about a journal he worked at a university, and they would not even read the submission, the slush piles. And they'd be like, no.
The horror stories from the journals, where
lighting fires with
interns
stuff.
didn't read it, and
just like that's the worst.
Yeah,
that's the very worst. You're like you're the special place in hell for you. Like if you're just really disregarding and not respecting the artist, you don't have to put an hour into every submission if it's clearly not going to be the right choice, but just give it a good look, pass it to the next person, take a look, have them take a look, and then, I don't know, respect the process, understand that people, and it's hard, in life to have that kind of respect for anything people do. Sometimes you're like, it's like your soul and your spirit you're putting out on the page, and then just to think about somebody just completely discarding it after you paid $5 to send it to them.
True story. I had my latest book manuscript rejected within 6 minutes.
6 minutes? No way.
I'm not making that up. 6 minutes.
AI
I pushed submit, and then 6 minutes later I rechecked. I just refreshed. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. There's an declined.
That would be cool if they accepted it in 6 minutes, and that would be.
And you know what? I would distrust that intensely if it got accepted in 6 minutes. Right?
6 minutes. Was it a whole book?
Oh, yeah. No, it was the whole book. It wasn't even a submit the first 20 pages. It was the whole book rejected in 6 minutes.
Did they say why?
No, of course they didn't.
I'm very proud that we have not named names or publishers. Like the amount of restraint that we've shown is like, you guys could be in the military. Like seriously, I'm super impressed.
Yes, that's how good we are here on Three Angsty Poets, right?
So we've done some riffing. Want to thank everybody who's still with us for listening to us bitch and complain about gatekeepers. I think we've decided that it can be really awful, but they also have some kind of role in the industry and in our personal lives as writers.
There's some heart there.
Yeah, they're there. Like it or not, they're there. They're part of the landscape. So you've heard us spew out our angst with gatekeepers. We are the Three Angsty Poets, myself, Tomas Baiza, with Rebecca Evans and Christian Winn. I hope that we have a lot more angst to share with you.
We certainly do.
Hopefully we will be back with you real soon.
If our gatekeepers do not keep us from going on the air.
If somebody doesn't pull the plug, right?
I know. Yeah, there's that. Oh, no.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back next Monday. Tune in.